The rain had been falling for 3 hours when Megan finally scraped together enough coins from her car's cup holders to buy a single lottery ticket. Standing in the fluorescent glow of the corner store, water dripping from her soaked hair onto the grimy floor, she almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, a software engineer who'd been laid off 6 months ago, spending her last $5 on what her father would call a tax on people who can't do math. But something about that particular Tuesday night made her feel reckless, desperate enough to believe in miracles. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The numbers she chose weren't random, though they were the dates that mattered most to her. Her mother's birthday, the day she'd graduated college, the anniversary of her grandmother's death. As the cashier handed her the thin slip of paper, Megan felt a strange tingling in her fingers, like electricity dancing across her skin. She tucked the ticket into her wallet, next to the eviction notice she'd been carrying around for 2 weeks, afraid to open it again, afraid to face the reality that she had exactly 11 days to come up with $3,000. What Megan didn't know as she walked back to her beat-up Honda Civic, rain pelting her windshield so hard she could barely see the road, was that those 6 numbers would change everything. Not just her bank account, not just her future, but her entire understanding of the people she'd called family her whole life. By the time the rain stopped the next morning, she would be holding a ticket worth $12 million. And by the end of the week, she would discover who among her loved ones actually loved her back. The phone call came at 7 in the morning, 3 days after she'd bought the ticket. Megan had been lying on her mattress on the floor of her studio apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked increasingly like her mother's disapproving face, when the automated voice delivered news that made her heart stop. She'd won. The jackpot. $12 million. After taxes, roughly $7.5 million would be hers. Megan's hands shook so violently that she dropped the phone twice before managing to hang up. She sat on the edge of her mattress, staring at the lottery ticket she'd pulled from her wallet, comparing the numbers for the 15th time to the ones displayed on the lottery website on her cracked phone screen. Every digit matched. Every single one. The logical part of her brain, the part that had earned her a computer science degree and landed her a 6-figure job at a tech startup, immediately began calculating. $7.5 million, properly invested, could generate enough passive income for her to live comfortably for the rest of her life. No more job interviews, no more rejection emails, no more lying awake at night wondering how she'd pay rent. But as she scrolled through her phone contacts, finger hovering over her mother's name, a different thought crept in. For the past 6 months, since losing her job, Megan had been reaching out to family members for help. Not handouts, just temporary support while she got back on her feet. The responses had been illuminating in ways she wished they hadn't been. Her brother Derek, who made over $200,000 a year as a plastic surgeon, had told her that tough times built character, and maybe this struggle would teach her to be more financially responsible. Her sister Jenna, married to a real estate mogul, had suggested that Megan's unemployment was probably a blessing in disguise, a chance to reassess her life choices and perhaps consider a more stable career path. Their parents, comfortable in their retirement thanks to her father's successful dental practice, had offered to help her create a budget and had mailed her a self-help book about financial planning instead of a check. The most painful conversation had been with her Aunt Patricia, her mother's sister, who had essentially raised Megan after her parents' messy divorce when she was 12. Patricia had listened to Megan's situation with what seemed like genuine concern, then suggested that perhaps it was time for Megan to learn some humility. She'd recommended that Megan move back home, get a part-time job at the local grocery store, and really think about what kind of person she wanted to be. Now, staring at the lottery ticket that represented more money than she'd ever dreamed of having, Megan felt something cold and calculating in her chest. These people, her family, had watched her struggle for months. They'd seen her pride crumble as she asked for help, had witnessed her desperation as her savings dwindled to nothing. And instead of extending a hand, they'd offered lectures about character building and personal responsibility. An idea began to form, dark and thrilling in equal measure. What would happen if they thought she'd lost everything? What would their reaction be if they believed she'd become exactly what they seemed to think she deserved to be, a failure who'd fallen as far as possible? Megan pulled up her laptop, the same one she'd been using to send out resumes and apply for jobs that never called back. Instead of browsing employment websites, she found herself researching something entirely different. How long did she have to claim her lottery prize? 6 months, according to the State Lottery Commission. How difficult would it be to fake homelessness convincingly? Surprisingly easy, based on the articles she found about the growing number of educated professionals who'd ended up on the streets after economic downturns. The plan that emerged over the next several hours was elaborate, perhaps unnecessarily so, but Megan found herself energized by the complexity of it. She would claim her prize anonymously, using a trust fund structure that would keep her name out of public records. The money would sit safely in investment accounts while she spent the next few months living as if she'd lost everything. She'd document her family's reactions, their willingness to help, or lack thereof, and then reveal the truth. It wasn't revenge, she told herself. It was research, a scientific experiment to determine the true nature of familial bonds when tested by genuine hardship. The first step was the hardest, giving up her apartment. Megan spent 2 days moving her few valuable possessions, mostly electronics and some jewelry her grandmother had left her, into a small storage unit across town. Everything else, the furniture she'd bought piece by piece during better times, the books that had gotten her through college, the artwork she'd collected from local artists, went to charity or the dumpster. She kept only what someone who'd lost everything might feasibly carry: a single backpack with a few changes of clothes, basic toiletries, and her phone with its cracked screen. The laptop went into storage, too conspicuous for someone supposedly at rock bottom. The physical transformation came next. Megan had always been meticulous about her appearance, a habit ingrained by years of professional environments and family gatherings where presentation mattered. Now she deliberately let her roots grow out, stopped wearing makeup, and chose clothes from thrift stores, items that were clean but clearly secondhand, worn enough to tell a story of decline. The most challenging part was learning to look defeated. Megan practiced in the mirror of a gas station bathroom, slumping her shoulders, letting her expression go slack, finding the posture of someone who'd given up hope. It felt like method acting for the most important role of her life. Her first test came when she called her mother. Linda Chen had always been a formidable woman, the kind of person who could identify weakness from across a crowded room and zero in on it with surgical precision. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional, even though she'd been retired from her teaching job for 3 years. "Megan, sweetheart, I was just thinking about you. How's the job search going?" Megan took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of desperation she'd felt during those long, hopeless months of unemployment. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I lost the apartment." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Megan wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "What do you mean you lost it?" "I couldn't make rent. I've been staying in my car for the past week, but even that's going to get repossessed soon. I don't know what to do." The words felt strange in her mouth, true in spirit, if not in fact. "Oh, Megan." Her mother's tone carried disappointment rather than surprise, as if this outcome had been inevitable. "I'm sorry to hear that, I really am. But honey, your father and we can't just solve all your problems. You're 32 years old. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own life." "I'm not asking you to solve anything," Megan said, her voice cracking slightly. "I just need a place to stay for a few days while I figure things out. Maybe I could sleep on your couch, just until I can get back on my feet." Another pause. Megan could practically hear her mother weighing the social implications of having a homeless daughter versus the inconvenience of actually helping.
Well, your father's been having trouble with his back, and we've got the guest room completely torn up for renovations. Plus, we're supposed to leave for that cruise next week, the one we booked 6 months ago. The timing just isn't good. Mom, I'm living in my car. And I understand that's difficult, I do. But sometimes we have to go through hard times to appreciate better ones. Have you considered reaching out to social services? There are programs designed for people in your situation. Megan closed her eyes, feeling a mix of vindication and heartbreak. This was exactly what she'd expected, but hearing it still felt like a physical blow. Social services. There's no shame in asking for help from the proper channels. And Megan, honey, maybe this is an opportunity for some real self-reflection. You've always been a little too proud for your own good. Sometimes life humbles us for a reason. After hanging up, Megan sat in her car in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, staring at her phone. The conversation had gone exactly as she'd predicted, but the reality of it felt worse than she'd imagined. Her mother hadn't even suggested she try to visit, hadn't offered any concrete help at all. Instead, she'd recommended government assistance and framed Megan's homelessness as a character-building exercise. Over the next several days, Megan systematically contacted every member of her immediate family, delivering variations of the same news. The responses formed a pattern that was both predictable and devastating. Derek, her surgeon brother, had been clinical in his detachment. He'd listened to her situation, made sympathetic noises, and then explained that his mortgage payments and private school tuition for his kids left him with very little disposable income. He'd suggested that she look into job training programs and mentioned that the hospital where he worked sometimes hired people for entry-level positions in housekeeping or food service. Nothing wrong with honest work, he'd said, as if she'd never held a job before. Jenna had been worse. She'd actually sounded excited about Megan's homelessness, as if it confirmed something she'd long suspected about her sister's character. "I hate to say I told you so," she'd begun, before spending 20 minutes doing exactly that. She'd reminisced about how Megan had always been the rebellious one, the family member who thought she was too good for practical advice. Now look where that attitude had gotten her. The conversation with Aunt Patricia hurt most of all. The woman who'd helped her with homework every night during middle school, who'd taught her to drive, who'd been more of a mother to her than Linda during those turbulent teenage years, had listened to Megan's story with what sounded like genuine concern. Then she'd sighed deeply and said, "Maybe this is exactly what you needed, sweetheart. You've been drifting for so long, ever since college, really. Perhaps hitting bottom will give you the motivation to rebuild yourself into someone stronger." By the end of the first week of her experiment, Megan had spoken to 12 family members. Not one had offered her a place to stay. 3 had suggested she contact homeless shelters. 2 had recommended she look into government assistance programs. 1 cousin had offered to pray for her. Her Uncle Bob had sent her a $20 gift card to McDonald's with a note saying he hoped it would help. The gift card had been the breaking point. $20. From a man who spent more than that on a single bottle of wine with dinner, who just bought a new boat, who posted photos on social media of his expensive vacations. $20, like she was a charity case he'd encountered on the street rather than his sister's daughter who was supposedly sleeping in her car. Megan had sat in that diner parking lot, staring at the gift card, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. The experiment was working too well. Her family's true colors weren't just showing, they were blazing like neon signs in the darkness. But the most unsettling realization was that none of their responses surprised her. Deep down, she'd known this was how they'd react. She'd spent 32 years watching them prioritize appearances over substance, comfort over compassion. She'd seen how they treated service workers, how they talked about less fortunate people, how they responded to requests for help from friends and neighbors. She'd just never imagined she'd be on the receiving end of that coldness. The second week brought new challenges as Megan learned to navigate the practical aspects of apparent homelessness. She couldn't actually sleep in her car every night. It was too risky and uncomfortable, so she'd rented a cheap motel room under a false name, paying cash for a week at a time. But during the days, she made sure to look the part of someone who truly lost everything. She began spending time in places where homeless people gathered, not to mock or exploit their situations, but to understand the reality of what she was pretending to live. The public library became her refuge, a place where she could use the internet for free and charge her phone without drawing attention. She learned which restaurants threw away food that was still edible, which gas stations had the cleanest bathrooms, which parks were safe to spend time in during daylight hours. The performance required constant vigilance. She had to remember to look tired, to let her appearance continue to deteriorate, to respond to questions about her situation with the right mix of shame and desperation. Most importantly, she had to resist the urge to solve her problems with the millions of dollars sitting in her investment accounts. It was during this second week that she encountered Marcus. She was sitting on a bench outside the public library, eating a sandwich she'd bought with her McDonald's gift card and checking job listings on her phone, when an older man approached. He was clearly homeless himself, his clothes weathered and patched, his hair gray and unkempt. But his eyes were kind, and when he asked if he could sit on the other end of the bench, his voice carried a dignity that reminded her of her grandfather. "First time on the streets?" he asked, after they'd sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Megan looked up, startled. "How did you know?" Marcus smiled, revealing teeth that had seen better days. You still got hope in your eyes. That goes away after a while if you're not careful. Over the next hour, Marcus told her his story. He'd been a high school teacher for 30 years before a series of medical emergencies bankrupted him. His family, he said, had tried to help at first, but there was only so much they could do. Eventually, the burden became too much and the relationships became too strained. He'd been on the streets for 2 years now, staying in shelters when he could, sleeping rough when he couldn't. The hardest part, he said, watching pigeons fight over breadcrumbs, isn't the cold or the hunger. It's becoming invisible. People look through you like you're not even there. Your own family starts to see you as a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be loved. Megan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Do you think they stop loving you? I think they love the memory of who you used to be. But the person you are now, the one who needs help, who makes them uncomfortable, who reminds them that bad things can happen to good people? He shrugged. That person is harder to love. That evening, Megan called her mother again. She'd been homeless for 2 weeks now, she said, and things were getting worse. She'd lost weight, she was having trouble staying clean, and the weather was turning cold. She wasn't asking for money, just a place to shower, maybe a hot meal once in a while.
Oh, sweetheart, Linda said, and for a moment, Megan thought she heard genuine concern. That sounds just awful. Have you been to the women's shelter on 5th Street? I heard they have very good programs. Mom, I don't want to go to a shelter. I want to come home. Megan, you are home. Home isn't a place, it's who you are inside. And right now, you need to focus on building yourself up from the inside out. A shelter might be exactly what you need to start that process. So you won't help me? I am helping you by not enabling this behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to solve their child's problems for them. It's called tough love, and yes, it's hard for me too. After hanging up, Megan sat in her motel room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. The past 2 weeks of deliberately neglecting her appearance, combined with the genuine stress of maintaining this elaborate deception, had transformed her into someone who looked genuinely down on her luck. Her clothes hung loose on her smaller frame, her hair was stringy and unwashed looking, and her eyes held a hollow quality that she hadn't had to practice. But it was working. Her family's responses were consistent and revealing. They were more concerned with protecting themselves from the inconvenience and discomfort of her situation than they were with actually helping her. They'd rather she seek help from strangers, from institutions, from anyone other than them. The 3rd week brought a new development. Jenna called, which was unusual since their last conversation had ended with Jenna essentially saying that Megan deserved her fate. I've been thinking about our conversation, Jenna said without preamble, and I talked to Mom and Derek, and we think we might have a solution. For a moment, Megan felt a flutter of hope, wondering if her family had finally realized the severity of her situation and decided to step up. There's this program, Jenna continued, a residential facility for people who are struggling with life skills and personal responsibility. It's not exactly a shelter, more like a halfway house. They help people get back on their feet, teach them budgeting and job interview skills, that sort of thing. You want me to put me in a halfway house? It's not putting you anywhere. We're offering you a resource. The program has a really good success rate, and they help with job placement afterwards. Derek knows someone who works there, and they might be able to get you in, even though there's usually a waiting list. Megan closed her eyes, feeling a familiar surge of dark amusement. Even when they were trying to help, they couldn't actually offer help themselves. Instead, they'd found a way to make her someone else's problem while still feeling good about their involvement. What if I don't want to go to a residential facility? What if I just need my family to help me for a few weeks while I get back on my feet? Megan, that's exactly the kind of thinking that got you into this situation. You're not thinking long-term. You're not addressing the underlying issues that caused your homelessness in the first place. This program would give you the tools you need to make sure this never happens again. The underlying issues? You mean losing my job?
I mean, whatever patterns of decision-making and personal management led to you being unable to cope with losing your job. Lots of people get laid off, Megan. They don't all end up homeless. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Jenna explaining all the ways this residential program would be better for Megan than actual family support. By the end, Megan was convinced that her sister genuinely believed she was being helpful, even generous. She'd found a solution that would get Megan off the streets without requiring any personal sacrifice or inconvenience from the family. It was perfect, really. They could tell themselves they'd helped while maintaining complete emotional and financial distance from the situation. That night, Megan found herself thinking about Marcus and his observation that people prefer to love the memory of who you used to be rather than deal with who you are now. Her family loved successful Megan, the software engineer with her own apartment and a promising career. They had no idea how to love struggling Megan, the woman who needed help and support and compassion. But the most disturbing realization was that she wasn't sure they were even trying to learn. The fourth week of her experiment brought an unexpected complication in the form of genuine connection. She'd been spending her afternoons at the library, maintaining her facade while actually working on the investment strategy for her lottery winnings. The librarian, a woman named Sarah who appeared to be in her 50s, had started recognizing her and occasionally making conversation. "Reading anything interesting?" Sarah asked one afternoon, noticing Megan hunched over a computer terminal. "Just job hunting," Megan replied, quickly closing the financial planning website she'd been browsing. Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Tough market out there. I see a lot of folks in here doing the same thing." She paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Listen, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you okay? I mean, beyond the job situation, you look like you might be having a rough time." Something in Sarah's voice, genuine concern without judgment, made Megan's carefully constructed walls crack slightly. "I'm managing," she said, which was both true and completely false. "Well, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here most days. And there are resources, not just the obvious ones. Sometimes people need help in ways that aren't immediately apparent." Over the following days, Sarah continued to show small kindnesses. She'd save Megan a computer with a comfortable chair, bring her coffee when the library had extra from staff meetings, and once, when Megan looked particularly tired, she'd quietly slipped her a granola bar and a package of tissues. These gestures, small as they were, stood in stark contrast to her family's responses. Sarah was essentially a stranger, someone who owed Megan nothing, yet she was showing more practical compassion than people who'd known and supposedly loved Megan her entire life. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was deceiving this genuinely caring person while her actual family couldn't be bothered to even attempt deception in service of kindness. It was during week 4 that Megan decided to escalate the experiment. She called her mother again, this time with a more desperate edge to her story. "Mom, I think I'm getting sick. I've been coughing a lot and I'm exhausted all the time. I don't know if it's because I'm not eating regularly or sleeping well, or if I picked up something, but I'm scared." Linda's response was immediate and telling. "Oh, honey, you need to get to a doctor right away. Do you have any insurance coverage from your old job?" "It ran out last month."
"I can't afford to see a doctor." "Well, there are community health centers, and emergency rooms can't turn you away if it's serious. You should definitely get checked out." "Could you help me with the cost? I know you and Dad have good insurance, and I promise I'd pay you back as soon as I get back on my feet." Another pause, longer this time. "Megan, you know we're on a fixed income now, and we just can't set a precedent of solving every problem with money. What happens the next time you get sick? We can't be your safety net forever." "I'm not asking you to be my safety net forever. I'm asking for help with a doctor's visit because I think I might be seriously ill, and I have nowhere else to turn." "And I'm telling you that you do have somewhere to turn. The healthcare system exists exactly for people in your situation. You just need to be proactive about accessing it." After that conversation, Megan sat in her motel room feeling genuinely nauseous, though not from any illness.
The casual cruelty of her mother's response, the way she'd managed to make Megan's potential illness about fiscal responsibility and life lessons was breathtaking in its selfishness. But it was also illuminating. This was who her mother really was, stripped of social niceties and family obligations. When push came to shove, when someone actually needed help rather than just wanting it, Linda Chen was more concerned with protecting her own comfort than with showing love. The experiment was working perhaps too well. Megan was learning exactly what she'd set out to discover about her family's true nature. The problem was that the knowledge was proving more painful than she'd anticipated. As the fourth week drew to a close, Megan realized she was at a crossroads. She could continue the deception, push it further, see just how far her family's indifference could stretch. Or she could end it, reveal the truth, and confront them with what she'd learned about their capacity for love. But there was a third option, one that was becoming more appealing with each passing day. She could simply disappear, take her millions, and start fresh somewhere else, with people who didn't know her history, who wouldn't have preconceived notions about who she should be or what she deserved. The thought of never having to see the disappointment in her mother's eyes again, never having to listen to Derek's condescending advice or Jenna's barely concealed contempt, was incredibly tempting. Sitting in that motel room, looking at herself in the mirror, Megan realized that the homeless woman staring back at her wasn't entirely a disguise anymore. In some fundamental way, she had become displaced, cut off from the people and places that had once anchored her identity. The question was whether that displacement was a loss to be mourned or a freedom to be embraced. Outside her window, the city hummed with the lives of millions of people, most of whom were strangers to each other, but who somehow managed to create communities, to show kindness, to build connections based on something more substantial than shared DNA or childhood memories. Maybe, Megan thought, it was time to find out if she could build a family that would actually love all of her, not just the successful, convenient parts. The decision about what to do next could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, she had planning to do, and a future to design, one that might not include the people who'd raised her, but who had never truly known her at all. The fifth week brought an unexpected phone call from Uncle Robert, her father's younger brother and arguably the most successful member of the extended family. Robert owned a chain of auto repair shops across 3 states and had always been the one family member Megan thought might be different. He'd paid for her college textbooks one semester when money was tight, and he'd never joined in the family's subtle criticisms of her career choices. "Megan, your mother told me about your situation," he said without preamble. "This is pretty serious." For the first time in weeks, Megan felt a genuine flutter of hope. "Uncle Robert, I'm so glad you called. I've been trying to figure out what to do, and I just feel so lost." "Well, I've been thinking about it, and I might have something for you. One of my shops needs someone to work the front desk, answer phones, that sort of thing. It's not much, minimum wage, but it's honest work, and it would get you back on your feet." Megan blinked, processing this offer. Her uncle, worth several $1,000,000, was offering her a minimum wage job answering phones? Not a place to stay while she looked for work in her actual field, not financial assistance to help her get back to where she'd been, but the opportunity to start over at the very bottom of the economic ladder? "That's very generous," she said carefully. "But Uncle Robert, I have a master's degree in computer science. I was making $90,000 a year before I got laid off. Maybe there's something at one of your locations that would use my actual skills?" Now, hold on there, Megan. I think you might be getting a little ahead of yourself. You've been homeless for a month. Before we start talking about high-level positions, don't you think you should prove you can hold down a basic job? Show up on time, follow directions, work with a team? The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and Megan felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You think I don't know how to show up on time? I think you've been out of the workforce for a while, and you're in a pretty vulnerable state right now. Sometimes when people hit bottom, they need to rebuild their work ethic along with everything else. This position would be good for you, help you remember what it feels like to earn an honest paycheck." There it was again, the implication that her previous career hadn't been honest work, that somehow her current situation reflected some fundamental character flaw rather than simple economic misfortune. Even Robert, whom she thought of as her most reasonable relative, saw her homelessness as evidence of personal failure rather than circumstance. "What about housing?" she asked. "The job wouldn't pay enough for me to afford rent anywhere, even with roommates." "Well, there are some extended stay motels that aren't too expensive, and once you've been working for a while, proven yourself reliable, maybe we could talk about a small raise. But Megan, you need to adjust your expectations. You can't just jump back to where you were. You need to work your way up from where you are now." After hanging up, Megan sat in her car in the library parking lot, feeling a mixture of rage and disbelief. Robert's offer perfectly encapsulated her family's approach to her situation. They were willing to help, but only in ways that reinforced their belief that she had somehow deserved what happened to her. The help came with conditions, expectations, and a hefty dose of moral instruction. More importantly, Robert's solution would have trapped her in poverty indefinitely. Minimum wage work while living in extended stay motels would have consumed every penny she earned, leaving nothing for saving, nothing for building toward a better situation. It was help designed to keep her dependent and grateful, not help designed to actually solve her problems. That afternoon, Sarah the librarian approached her again, this time with obvious concern written across her face. "Honey, I don't want to overstep, but you look terrible. When's the last time you had a real meal?" Megan looked down at herself, realizing that her disguise had become almost too convincing. The stress of maintaining the deception, combined with the genuine emotional toll of her family's responses, had left her looking gaunt and exhausted. "I'm managing," she said, the standard response she'd developed for such questions. Sarah sat down across from her, lowering her voice. "Listen, I know this might sound strange, but my daughter is about your age, and if she were in trouble, I'd hope someone would look out for her. There's a room above my garage that I've been meaning to rent out."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
It's small, just a studio really, but it has its own bathroom and a little kitchenette. I was thinking maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement. "I don't have money for rent," Megan said automatically. I wasn't talking about money. I could use help with some projects around the house, yard work, that sort of thing. And I get lonely since my husband passed. Maybe we could help each other out. The offer was so genuinely kind, so free of conditions and judgment, that Megan felt tears spring to her eyes. This virtual stranger was offering her exactly what her own family had refused to provide: shelter and dignity and human connection. "Why would you do that for me?" Megan asked. Sarah shrugged. "Because I can. Because sometimes people need help, and sometimes we're in a position to provide it. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that." The simplicity of Sarah's reasoning stood in stark contrast to her family's elaborate justifications for why they couldn't help. No lectures about personal responsibility, no concerns about enabling bad behavior, no demands that she prove herself worthy of assistance first. Just straightforward human kindness, offered to another human being in need. Megan almost accepted on the spot, but something held her back. Sarah's offer was genuine, which meant accepting it under false pretenses felt wrong in a way that lying to her family didn't. Her family had shown they didn't really care about her well-being, but Sarah did, and that made the deception feel cruel. "I need to think about it," Megan said finally. "Of course, the offer stands whenever you're ready." That evening, Megan made another round of calls to family members, this time with a story that pushed the boundaries even further. She'd been attacked while sleeping in her car, she told them. Nothing was stolen, but she'd been hurt and was scared to stay on the streets. The responses followed the now familiar pattern: concern mixed with advice about police reports and victim services, suggestions about shelters and social programs, gentle reminders that these kinds of things happen to people who put themselves in vulnerable positions. Derek had been particularly clinical. "It's unfortunate, but not surprising. When you're living on the streets, you expose yourself to criminal elements. This should be a wake-up call about the importance of getting into stable housing as soon as possible." "I'm trying to get into stable housing," Megan had replied. "That's why I'm calling you." And I've told you, I can connect you with social services programs that are designed exactly for people in your situation. They have security, caseworkers, job training programs, much safer than trying to patch together temporary solutions. Even her Aunt Patricia, who'd been the most sympathetic of all her relatives, had responded to the news of the attack with advice rather than action. She'd recommended that Megan carry pepper spray, suggested she look into women's shelters specifically, and mentioned that many churches had programs for people in crisis. Not one person had said, "Come stay with me until you're safe." The contrast with Sarah's immediate offer of help was impossible to ignore. Sarah barely knew her, had no obligation to her, and yet had responded to perceived need with practical assistance. Her family, people who claimed to love her, people who'd known her for decades, responded to actual danger with resource referrals. Week 6 brought a new development that forced Megan to confront the sustainability of her experiment. She was in the library, ostensibly job hunting, but actually monitoring her investment accounts, when she felt someone sit down next to her. Megan Chen? She looked up to see a woman about her age, professionally dressed, with a badge identifying her as a social worker from the county. "I'm Janet Williams from Adult Protective Services. I understand you've been experiencing homelessness for several weeks now." Megan's heart started racing. "I'm sorry, who told you that?" "We received a call from a family member expressing concern about your situation. They mentioned that you'd been attacked recently and were refusing help from available services." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. One of her family members, probably acting out of what they considered genuine concern, had called social services on her. They'd managed to turn even this into something that wasn't their responsibility, wasn't their problem to solve. "I'm not refusing help," Megan said carefully. "I'm just trying to figure out my options." Janet's expression was kind but professional. "I understand this is a difficult situation, but there are resources available, and we want to make sure you're aware of them. There's a bed available at the women's shelter downtown, and they have caseworkers who can help you access benefits, job training, mental health services if needed." "What if I don't want to go to a shelter?" "That's your choice, of course, but living on the streets isn't safe, especially for women. And the longer someone remains homeless, the harder it becomes to get back to stable housing and employment." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Janet explaining various programs and services, while Megan provided vague responses about considering her options. Throughout the interaction, she couldn't shake the knowledge that this conversation was happening because her family had essentially called the authorities on her, rather than deal with her situation themselves. After Janet left, Megan sat staring at the computer screen, no longer seeing the job listings she had pulled up for appearances. The experiment had taken on a life of its own. What had started as a way to test her family's love had become an elaborate performance that was now involving innocent people like Sarah and Janet. More troubling was the realization that she was beginning to lose herself in the role. The constant stress of maintaining the deception, combined with the genuine emotional impact of her family's responses, was affecting her mental state in ways she hadn't anticipated. She found herself feeling genuinely hopeless sometimes, genuinely angry at a world that would let people fall through the cracks. That night, in her motel room, Megan made a decision. It was time to move toward the reveal, but she wanted to try one more test, something that would give her family a chance to redeem themselves before she exposed the truth. She crafted a text message and sent it to every member of her immediate family simultaneously. "I know this is hard to hear, but I need you to know how much I love all of you. These past weeks have been the hardest of my life, but knowing I have family who care about me has kept me going. I'm not giving up, but I wanted you to know that if something happens to me, if I don't make it through this, it's not because I didn't try. It's because the world is harder than I thought it would be. I love you all so much." The message was designed to sound like it might be a goodbye note, desperate enough to prompt immediate action from anyone who truly cared about her well-being. The responses came within hours, and they were uniformly disappointing. Her mother texted back, "Honey, this sounds like you might be having some dark thoughts. There are crisis hotlines you can call if you're feeling overwhelmed. Please reach out to professionals who are trained to help with these feelings." Derek's response was longer but equally clinical. "Megan, if you're having thoughts of self-harm, you need to get to an emergency room immediately. They have psychiatric services that can help stabilize your mood and connect you with ongoing mental health support.
Jenna had written, "This message is really concerning. Are you saying you're thinking about hurting yourself? Because that would be a permanent solution to a temporary problem. You need to call a suicide prevention hotline right now." Even Aunt Patricia, who'd shown the most warmth throughout the process, had responded with, "Sweetheart, I'm worried about you. This doesn't sound like the strong, smart woman I know. Please call someone qualified to help you work through these feelings." Once again, every single family member had responded to what sounded like a crisis by referring her to professionals, strangers, institutions. Not one had said they were coming to find her. Not one had offered to talk through her feelings personally. Not one had suggested that maybe, just maybe, she should come home where people who loved her could take care of her. The pattern was so consistent it felt almost surreal. No matter what she told them, no matter how desperate her situation became, their response was always the same: seek help from appropriate resources, access available services, contact qualified professionals. It was as if they'd all read from the same script about how to care about someone without actually taking care of them. The next morning brought a phone call from her mother, the first time Linda had actually called rather than texted in response to one of Megan's updates. "Megan, your text last night really worried me. Are you okay?" "I'm still here, if that's what you're asking. I need you to promise me that if you're having thoughts of hurting yourself, you'll call the crisis hotline. I have the number if you need it." "Mom, I don't need a hotline. I need my family. And we are here for you, sweetheart, but we're not qualified to help with mental health issues. That's what professionals are for." "I don't have mental health issues. I have a housing issue and a job issue and a family issue." "Well, the housing and job parts can be addressed through the services we've discussed. As for family issues, maybe some of this situation has been caused by unrealistic expectations about what family can and should do for each other." There it was, finally stated explicitly. Linda thought Megan's expectations of family support were unrealistic. She believed that wanting her family to actually help her in a crisis was somehow inappropriate or excessive. "What do you think family is for, Mom?" "Family is for love and support and encouragement. It's not for solving practical problems that adults should be able to handle themselves. And if an adult can't handle them themselves, then there are systems in place to help. That's why we pay taxes, why we have social services, why there are programs for people in need." Megan closed her eyes, feeling a sort of crystalline clarity settle over her. This was it. This was who her mother really was, who they all really were. People who believed that love was an emotion rather than an action, who thought that caring about someone was sufficient even if you never actually cared for them. "I have to go, Mom." "Wait, Megan, before you hang up, I want you to know that we're all proud of you for reaching out, for asking for help. That takes courage." The irony was breathtaking. Her mother was praising her for asking for help while simultaneously refusing to provide any. After hanging up, Megan sat in her car and began laughing. Not with humor, but with the kind of hysterical recognition that comes when something absurd becomes so absurd it transcends reason entirely. She was sitting on $7.5 million while her family congratulated themselves for caring about her enough to recommend government assistance programs. She was financially capable of solving not just her own problems, but theirs as well, while they explained why it wasn't their responsibility to help her with problems they assumed she couldn't solve. The experiment had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. She now knew exactly who her family members were, what they valued, and how much their love was actually worth in practical terms. The question was what to do with that knowledge. Sarah found her in the library that afternoon, looking more concerned than ever. "Honey, I heard through the grapevine that social services has been looking for you. Is everything okay?" Megan looked up at this woman who'd shown her more genuine care in a few weeks than her family had in months of crisis, and made a decision. "Sarah, can I ask you something? Why did you offer to help me? Really?" Sarah sat down, considering the question seriously. "I suppose because I recognized something in you. You remind me of my daughter, not just in age, but in spirit. She went through a rough patch a few years ago after her divorce, lost her job, had to move back in with me for a while. Some people in town made comments, about how she should have been more careful with her choices, more responsible with her planning.
She paused, looking out the library window at the street beyond. But I knew my daughter. I knew she was smart and capable and just going through something temporary. She didn't need lectures or judgment. She needed time and support and someone to believe in her while she figured things out. And you know what? She did figure it out. She's a nurse practitioner now, has her own place, is doing great. But I don't think that would have happened if I'd spent that time explaining to her why her situation was her own fault, instead of just helping her through it. Megan felt tears starting to form. And you think I'm like your daughter? I think you're someone who's going through something temporary and needs time and support to figure it out. I think you're probably smarter and more capable than your current situation suggests. And I think whoever raised you didn't teach you that it's okay to accept help when you need it. The assessment was so accurate, it took Megan's breath away. Sarah had seen her clearly in a way that her actual family never had recognized her fundamental worth while they questioned her fundamental character. Sarah, what if I told you I wasn't who you think I am? I'd say that I don't think you're anyone other than a young woman who needs help. Whatever else is true doesn't change that. Megan made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I'd like to take you up on your offer. The room above your garage, if it's still available. Sarah's face lit up.
Of course it's still available. When would you like to see it? Now, if that's okay. As they walked to Sarah's car, Megan felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks, anticipation instead of dread. For the first time since starting this experiment, she was moving towards something good instead of just documenting something awful. The room above Sarah's garage was small but perfect, with large windows that let in afternoon light and a tiny kitchen that looked out over a garden. It was clean and quiet and safe, everything Megan hadn't realized she'd been craving until she saw it. "It's not much," Sarah said apologetically, "but the mattress is new and I just had the bathroom redone." "It's perfect," Megan said, and meant it. That evening, Megan moved her few possessions from the motel to Sarah's garage apartment. For the first time in weeks, she had a real address, a place where she could receive mail, a door she could lock behind her. But more than that, she had something she hadn't expected to find, a glimpse of what family could actually look like when it was based on care rather than obligation, on love as action rather than just emotion. As she unpacked her backpack in her new space, Megan began planning the final phase of her experiment. It was time to reveal the truth, but she wanted to do it in a way that would create maximum impact, that would force her family to confront not just what they've learned about her, but what she'd learned about them. The revelation would come soon, but first she had some arrangements to make. And some decisions about whether these people who'd failed her so completely deserved a place in the wealthy, successful life she was about to reclaim. Outside her new window, Sarah was watering her garden in the fading light, humming softly to herself. Watching her, Megan realized that family wasn't really about blood or shared history. It was about who showed up when you needed them, who offered help without conditions, who saw your worth even when you couldn't see it yourself. By that definition, she'd found more family in 6 weeks with a librarian than she'd had in 32 years with the people who'd raised her. The realization should have been devastating, but instead, it felt like freedom. Tomorrow, she would start preparing for the confrontation that would end this experiment once and for all. But tonight, she would sleep in a real bed, in a safe place, cared for by someone who had chosen to love her without knowing anything about her bank account or her past achievements. It was the best she'd felt in months, possibly years, and it had taken losing everything, or pretending to lose everything, to find it. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to test whether her family would love her at her lowest point, she discovered that their love had never been about her at all. It had been about who they needed her to be for their own comfort, their own image of themselves as good people. But she'd also discovered that real love did exist, that there were people in the world who would see her clearly and choose to help anyway. That knowledge was worth more than the millions sitting in her investment accounts, though she suspected that combining the two would create possibilities she was only beginning to imagine.
The experiment was almost over, but the real life she was going to build from its ashes was just beginning. The morning Megan decided to end the experiment began like any other. She woke up in Sarah's garage apartment, made coffee in the tiny kitchenette, and watched through her window as her landlord tended to her roses. The normalcy of it felt surreal after weeks of calculated deception and manufactured desperation. But today was different. Today, she would stop being homeless Megan and reclaim her identity as lottery winner Megan. The question that had kept her awake most of the night was how to orchestrate the revelation in a way that would force her family to confront their behavior without allowing them to dismiss it as some kind of psychological breakdown or elaborate joke. The plan that had crystallized involved her investment advisor, a man named Thomas Kellerman, who worked for one of the most prestigious wealth management firms in the city. She'd been working with him remotely to structure her investments, and he'd been pushing for an in-person meeting to finalize some documents. Perfect. Megan spent the morning crafting a series of emails. The first was to Thomas, asking him to schedule a meeting at his downtown office and requesting that he prepared documentation showing her current net worth and investment portfolio. The second was to a high-end clothing boutique, arranging for a complete wardrobe consultation and same-day tailoring. The third was to her family, all of them, requesting that they meet her at a specific restaurant at 7 that evening for what she described as important news about my situation. The transformation began at noon. At the boutique, Megan explained that she needed to look like someone worth $8 million, and the stylist took her at her word. 3 hours later, she emerged looking like the successful professional she'd been before the experiment began, but elevated. The tailored suit, expert makeup, and professional styling created an image of serious wealth and competence. The meeting with Thomas went exactly as planned. He presented her with a comprehensive portfolio overview, complete with charts and projections that made her financial position unmistakably clear. She was worth $7.8 million, with investments generating enough passive income to support a very comfortable lifestyle indefinitely. "I must say, Miss Chen, your approach to this windfall has been remarkably sophisticated," Thomas said as they concluded their business. "Most lottery winners spend impulsively and end up broke within a few years. Your investment strategy suggests you understand the responsibility that comes with this kind of wealth." Megan smiled, thinking about the responsibility she was about to demonstrate. "I've learned a lot about responsibility in the past few weeks." The restaurant she'd chosen for the family meeting was upscale but not ostentatious, the kind of place where serious conversations happened over expensive wine. She arrived early and requested a private dining room, explaining to the manager that she'd be conducting some important family business and would prefer not to be interrupted. Her family arrived within minutes of each other, looking variously confused, concerned, and irritated. Linda came first, followed by Derek and his wife Amanda, then Jenna and her husband Mike. Uncle Robert arrived last, checking his watch as if to emphasize that his time was valuable. They found Megan seated at the head of a long table, wearing clothes that cost more than most people spent on rent, looking nothing like the desperate woman who'd been calling them for help for weeks. "Megan?" Her mother's voice was uncertain. "What is this? Where did you get those clothes?" "Please, everyone, sit down. I have some things to explain." Derek was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "You look completely different. What's going on here?" Megan waited until they were all seated, noting how they positioned themselves around the table. Her parents sat together, but not close to her. Derek and Amanda chose seats that put them at a distance. Jenna and Mike sat across from her, but kept their body language closed off. Uncle Robert remained standing, as if ready to leave at any moment. "I want to start by thanking you all for coming," Megan began. "I know these past few weeks have been difficult for everyone." "Difficult?" Jenna's voice was sharp. "Megan, we've been worried sick. You've been living on the streets, sending us messages that sounded like suicide notes. Now you show up dressed like you own a Fortune 500 company. What the hell is going on?" Megan reached into her purse and pulled out a folder containing her investment documents. She slid it across the table to her mother. "Why don't you take a look at that and tell me what you think?" Linda opened the folder with shaking hands, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as she scanned the numbers. "This says you have almost $8 million. 7.8 million, to be precise. The silence that followed was deafening.
Derek grabbed the folder from his mother, his medical training allowing him to process information quickly. This is dated today. These are current balances. That's right. Where did this money come from? Uncle Robert demanded, finally sitting down. Megan reached into her purse again and pulled out the lottery ticket, the one she'd bought with her last $5 7 weeks ago. She placed it on the table next to the financial documents. I won the lottery, the night you all watched me buy this ticket, actually. I won $12 million before taxes, about $7.5 million after. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one could see. One by one, her family members began to understand the implications of what she was telling them. "You've been rich this whole time?" Amanda asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been rich this whole time," Megan confirmed. Linda's face was cycling through emotions too quickly to track. "But you called us. You said you were homeless, that you'd been attacked, that you needed help." "I did say those things, and I was curious to see how you'd respond." "You lied to us?" Derek said, his voice rising. "You put us through weeks of worry and guilt and sleepless nights because you wanted to see how we'd respond?" "Actually, Derek, you slept fine. I know because when I called you in tears saying I'd been attacked while sleeping in my car, you told me it was my own fault for putting myself in that situation, and then you recommended I contact victim services." Derek's face flushed red. "That's not fair. We gave you advice, resources, options." "You gave me everything except help," Megan replied calmly. "Every single one of you had the means to solve my problems immediately, but instead you gave me phone numbers and lectures about personal responsibility." Jenna stood up abruptly. "This is insane. You're trying to make us feel guilty for not enabling what we thought was self-destructive behavior?" "I'm not trying to make you feel anything, Jenna. I'm telling you what happened. When I called asking for a place to stay for a few days, you told me I needed to learn humility. When I said I was sleeping in my car, you recommended a residential facility for people with life skills problems." "Because we thought you were actually in crisis," Jenna shouted. "We thought you were having some kind of breakdown and needed professional help, not people feeding into your delusions." "What delusions?" Megan asked. "The delusion that family members help each other during hard times? The delusion that people who claim to love you might offer practical support when you're desperate?" Uncle Robert leaned forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "So this was all a test? You put your entire family through emotional hell as some kind of psychological experiment?" "I discovered that my family was willing to let me sleep on the streets rather than inconvenience themselves. That wasn't an experiment, Uncle Robert. That was just reality." Linda finally found her voice. "We offered you help. We gave you resources, connections, advice." "Mom, you told me that homelessness might be exactly what I needed to learn humility. You said that sometimes life humbles people for a reason." "I was trying to help you maintain some dignity in a difficult situation. By telling me to go to a homeless shelter instead of coming home?" The questions were coming faster now, each family member trying to justify their behavior while simultaneously grappling with the knowledge that they'd failed a test they hadn't known they were taking. "This isn't fair," Amanda said. "You can't judge people based on how they respond to a situation that wasn't real." "It was real," Megan replied. "My homelessness was fake, but your responses were absolutely real. When you thought I was desperate, when you thought I had nowhere else to turn, you chose not to help." Derek slammed his hand on the table. "We're not social services. We're not responsible for solving every problem you create for yourself." "I didn't create this problem for myself, Derek. I was laid off from my job through no fault of my own, and I ran out of savings. That could happen to anyone, including you." "But it didn't happen to me because I plan better, because I'm more responsible with money, because I don't make impulsive decisions." Megan laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Right. It could never happen to you because you're better than me. That's what you really think, isn't it?" The ugly truth was finally emerging, the beliefs that had underlain their responses to her crisis. They believed, on some fundamental level, that people who ended up homeless deserved it, that economic hardship was a moral failing rather than a circumstance. "You know what the really interesting part is?" Megan continued.
I met a librarian during this experiment, a woman named Sarah who barely knew me but offered me a place to stay when I needed it. No conditions, no lectures, no demands that I prove myself worthy first, just human kindness offered to another human being. That's different, Jenna said defensively. She didn't have the kind of relationship with you that we do. She didn't have the same investment in your long-term well-being. Exactly, Megan said. She had no investment in me at all, and yet she was willing to help. You had every reason to care about my well-being, and you chose not to. Uncle Robert was studying the financial documents again. I don't understand something.
If you had all this money, why continue the charade for so long? Why not reveal it after a few days and have a good laugh? Megan looked at him steadily. Because your responses kept getting worse. Every time I thought I'd seen the bottom of your capacity for indifference, one of you would say something that went even lower. I needed to understand how far it went. And now you know, Linda said bitterly. So what happens now? You've humiliated us all, proven whatever point you were trying to make. What's next? Now we all live with what we've learned about each other. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Derek was staring at his hands. Amanda looked like she might be sick, and Jenna was crying quietly. Uncle Robert appeared to be calculating something, perhaps wondering if there might still be a way to benefit from his niece's sudden wealth. I need all of you to understand something, Megan said, her voice steady. This wasn't about the money. I don't need your money, obviously. This was about whether you would show up for me when I needed you, whether your love was conditional on my success and independence, or whether it was strong enough to survive seeing me at my lowest point. And what's your conclusion? Derek asked, his medical training making him approach even this emotional devastation like a diagnosis. My conclusion is that you love the idea of me, but not the reality of me. You love successful Megan, independent Megan, Megan who doesn't need anything from you. But the moment I became someone who required care instead of just offering it, I became a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. Linda was crying now, but whether from guilt or anger, Megan couldn't tell. That's not true. We do love you. You love me conditionally, Mom, as long as I don't need too much, don't ask for too much, don't inconvenience you too much. But the moment I actually needed you, you all made it clear that wasn't your responsibility. So what are you saying? Uncle Robert asked. That we're all terrible people because we didn't drop everything to solve a problem we thought you needed to solve yourself? I'm saying that when I was desperate and scared and had nowhere to turn, every single one of you prioritized your own comfort over my well-being. That's not a judgment, it's just a fact. The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through anger, defensiveness, guilt, and recrimination. Her family members tried various strategies to reframe their behavior as reasonable, caring, or even necessary for Megan's own good. They accused her of manipulation, of cruelty, of conducting an unfair experiment that put them in an impossible position. But underneath all the justifications, Megan could see that they knew. They understood that when tested, they had failed to show up for someone they claimed to love. The elaborate explanations for their behavior couldn't change the fundamental reality of what they had chosen to do and not do. As the evening wound down, the question became what would happen next. Her family seemed to expect either forgiveness or punishment, some kind of resolution that would allow them to move forward with their relationships intact. Instead, Megan offered them something more unsettling: complete freedom. I want all of you to know that I don't expect anything from you going forward, she said as they prepared to leave. No apologies, no changed behavior, no acknowledgement of what happened here. You've shown me who you are when I need you, and I accept that. I'll build my life accordingly. What does that mean? Linda asked. It means I'm not going to keep pretending that we have the kind of family relationship where people take care of each other. I'll be polite at holidays, I'll send birthday cards, I'll maintain the social forms. But I won't be calling you when I need support, and I won't be available when you need support either. The implications of this statement settled over them slowly.
Megan wasn't cutting them off entirely, but she was fundamentally changing the terms of their relationships. She was treating them like distant relatives rather than close family, people to be cordial with but not dependent on. "You can't just shut us out because we didn't handle one situation the way you wanted," Jenna protested. "I'm not shutting you out, Jenna. I'm accepting the level of relationship you've demonstrated you want to have. You've shown me that you see me as someone who should solve her own problems and not burden the family with her needs. Fine, I'll operate on that basis going forward." Derek leaned forward, his expression serious. "Megan, I think you're making a mistake. Family relationships are complicated. You can't judge everything based on one situation." "It wasn't one situation, Derek. It was 7 weeks of situations. 7 weeks of me asking for help and you explaining why you couldn't provide it. 7 weeks of you demonstrating exactly how much I could count on you." As they filed out of the private dining room, each family member seemed to be processing the evening differently. Some appeared angry, others guilty, a few confused about what had just happened to their family dynamics. Uncle Robert lingered after the others left, and Megan suspected she knew why. "That was quite a performance," he said once they were alone. "It wasn't a performance, Uncle Robert. It was a revelation." "Right, well, regardless of how all that went, you're obviously in a position now to make some smart investment decisions. I've been thinking about expanding my business, and with the right backing." Megan stared at him for a long moment, marveling at his ability to transition seamlessly from moral outrage to financial opportunity. "No," she said simply. "You haven't even heard my proposal." "I don't need to. The answer is no." She left him sitting in the restaurant, probably calculating whether there might still be other approaches to accessing her wealth. Outside, the city hummed with evening activity, people heading home from work, couples meeting for dinner, families walking together. Megan realized that for the first time in weeks, she felt genuinely free. Not free from her problems, which had been fake anyway, but free from the exhausting work of trying to maintain relationships with people who fundamentally didn't care about her well-being. The drive back to Sarah's house took her through neighborhoods where she'd spent time during her fake homelessness, past the library where she'd met Marcus, past the shelter where Janet the social worker had suggested she might find help. The geography of her experiment stretched out around her, each location holding memories of lessons learned about human nature and family loyalty. Sarah was waiting for her when she pulled into the driveway, sitting on her front porch with a cup of tea and a book. "How did it go?" Sarah asked. Megan sat down on the porch steps, still wearing her expensive suit, but feeling more relaxed than she had in months. "About as well as I expected, which is to say, terribly. Do you want to talk about it?" For the first time since the experiment began, Megan told someone the complete truth. She explained about the lottery ticket, about the weeks of fake homelessness, about her family's responses and the evening's confrontation. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just witnessing the story. "I suppose the question now," Megan concluded, "is what to do with all this knowledge about who people really are." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Can I ask you something that might be difficult?" "After tonight, nothing could be more difficult." "Do you think there's any chance that your family's responses came from love, just expressed in a way that didn't meet your needs?" Megan considered the question seriously. It was the kind of generous interpretation she might have offered herself weeks ago, before she'd heard Derek explain that her attack was her own fault, before she'd listened to her mother recommend government assistance while refusing to offer personal help. "I think they told themselves their responses came from love," she said finally, "but I think real love shows up differently. Real love prioritizes the other person's well-being over your own comfort." "Like what I offered you?" "Like what you offered me." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "So what happens now?" Megan looked around at the small garden, the modest house, the garage apartment that had become her sanctuary. "I think I'd like to stay here for a while, if that's okay. Pay you actual rent now that I can afford it, but stay in this space where someone actually cared about my well-being." "Of course.
But what about your long-term plans? With that kind of money, you could do anything, go anywhere. I could, but first, I think I want to understand what it feels like to be part of a chosen family instead of just a biological one. I want to learn what it's like to have relationships based on mutual care instead of obligation. Over the following weeks, Megan began building a new life that incorporated both her wealth and the lessons of her experiment. She established a foundation focused on helping people transition out of homelessness, with Sarah as her first board member. She invested in the library where she'd spent so many hours, funding programs that provided resources for people in economic crisis. Most importantly, she began cultivating relationships with people who had shown her genuine kindness during her worst moments, or who she met afterward who demonstrated the capacity for unconditional care. Marcus, the homeless man who'd shared his wisdom about invisible people, became the foundation's first success story when Megan quietly arranged for him to receive the support he needed to get back on his feet. Janet, the social worker who'd approached her with genuine concern, became a key partner in developing effective programs. Her biological family continued to exist on the periphery of her life, exactly as she'd promised. She sent birthday cards and attended holiday gatherings, maintained the social forms without the emotional investment. Some of them tried to repair the relationship, offering belated apologies or explanations for their behavior during her crisis. But Megan had learned something fundamental during those 7 weeks. People show you who they are during crisis, and it's important to believe them the first time. Derek made several attempts to restart their sibling relationship, suggesting they meet for coffee or dinner to work things out. But his idea of working things out involved her understanding why his responses had been reasonable, not him acknowledging how they had been hurtful. Jenna sent a long email 6 months later explaining that she'd been going through her own stresses during Megan's situation and hadn't been able to respond optimally. The email was less an apology than a request for understanding, a way of reframing her behavior as understandable rather than unacceptable. Their mother made perhaps the most interesting attempt at reconciliation, calling Megan a year after the restaurant confrontation to say that she'd been thinking about their conversation and realized she might have handled things differently. When Megan asked what she might have done differently, Linda couldn't specify. She just had a vague sense that the outcome hadn't been what she'd intended. The most telling interaction came from Uncle Robert, who continued to reach out periodically with investment opportunities, business proposals, and suggestions for how Megan might leverage her resources more effectively. He seemed genuinely unable to understand that her rejection of his proposals wasn't financial but personal. None of them seemed to grasp that the fundamental issue wasn't their specific responses during her crisis, but what those responses revealed about their understanding of love, family, and obligation. They wanted to treat the symptoms rather than acknowledge the disease. Meanwhile, Megan's chosen family grew slowly but steadily. Sarah introduced her to other people who shared their values of practical kindness and mutual support. She met couples who opened their homes to people in transition, volunteers who spent their weekends serving meals at shelters, professionals who used their skills to help people navigate systems designed to exclude them. These people became her real family, the ones she called during difficult times, the ones who celebrated her successes, the ones who showed up without being asked when she needed support. 2 years after winning the lottery, Megan was featured in a magazine article about young philanthropists making a difference in their communities. The article mentioned her work with homeless services, her foundation's innovative approaches to housing assistance, and her quiet but significant contributions to various social programs. Her biological family learned about the article through mutual acquaintances, and several of them reached out to express pride in her accomplishments. The irony wasn't lost on Megan that they were proud of her for helping strangers, but had been unwilling to help her themselves when she was the one in need. The magazine article also brought an unexpected contact, a letter from a woman named Jennifer, whose own family had abandoned her during a medical crisis. Jennifer had read Megan's story and recognized something familiar in it, the experience of discovering that people you thought would be there for you simply weren't. Their correspondence led to a friendship, and eventually to Jennifer joining both Megan's foundation board and her chosen family. Jennifer's experience provided insights that helped them develop better programs, but more importantly, it reinforced Megan's understanding that her own family's behavior wasn't unique or personal. It was part of a broader pattern of how people sometimes fail each other, and how important it is to build relationships with people who won't fail you in the same ways. 5 years after the lottery win, Megan's life looked nothing like what anyone might have predicted on that rainy night when she bought the winning ticket. She lived in a beautiful home she'd purchased near Sarah, who had become the closest thing to a mother figure she'd ever had. Her foundation was nationally recognized for its innovative approaches to homelessness prevention. She was in a relationship with someone who had proven himself capable of supporting her through both success and struggle. Most importantly, she was surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally, who showed up for her consistently, who prioritized her well-being alongside their own. The experiment that had begun as a test of her biological family's love had evolved into something much more significant, a blueprint for building relationships based on actual care rather than theoretical obligation. Her biological family remained in her life exactly as she'd promised they would, as polite acquaintances rather than intimate connections. Some of them had grown to understand what they'd lost through their choices during her crisis. Others remained convinced that she was the one who had behaved unreasonably. But their understanding or lack thereof had ceased to matter to Megan years ago. She'd learned that you can't force people to love you the way you need to be loved, but you can choose to surround yourself with people who do love you that way naturally. The lottery ticket that had started everything was framed in her office, not as a symbol of her wealth, but as a reminder of the moment her real life had begun. Not when she became rich, but when she learned the difference between people who claim to love you and people who actually do. Sometimes visitors would ask about the ticket, and Megan would tell them it represented the most expensive education she'd ever received, and the most valuable. She'd spent 7 weeks and risked several relationships to learn something that would shape the rest of her life. That family isn't about who raises you or shares your DNA, but about who shows up when you need them most. It was a lesson worth every penny of the millions she'd spent learning it, and worth every relationship she'd had to leave behind to make room for better ones. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.